If you'll let them know that Leah has, got some roads and problems on her road, they've got the road blocked, she can't get down, and she's gonna be, she'll be here about 8. Okay, thank you, hon. Good, so she knows about yeah. Okay. That's right. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I'm about right.
Has us down to state hospital. Probably not. It's on my phone. It's not mine.
Well, I feel Dr. Stowe, I'll give Johnny some again. Okay. Dr. Stowe always like each one late, so I will, bring the meeting to the quorum is present, so we will come to order. I'd like to welcome our guests tonight. Our really only public, information tonight is discussion of transition to CHC, and I'm gonna call on Bill Roloff to, introduce his staff and give us a presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I know there's a certain amount of, well, there's a lot of interest and a certain amount of angst of what's going on. And so we wanted to just take an opportunity, as you know, at the end of May, the hospital is being transitioned from ETMC to the hospital district. Hospital district has contracted with CHC out of Dallas to work with the district to make this transition. My name is Bill Roloff. I'll be the interim CEO. Barbara Watson, right here, will be the interim CNO. The small cast of characters that we've got here tonight is just that small because there's a large force of people back in, actually it's Plano. I say Dallas, but that's because I was born and raised in Dallas, so everything's Dallas. But CHC's got a wide and deep staff that will be working with the district to make this transition, working with ETMC because it is a daunting task. 100 is kind of the magic, not magic number, but a number that keeps popping up because one, we've got less than 100 days to get this transition done. CHC, we've got a dynamic list, transition list, things to do. It's about 100 items right now, and many of those items are major items that have sub-items under it. So you can wear yourself out or get overwhelmed looking at what happens. We will be working with ETMC to do this. There are a lot of documents. We've got probably 100 outside contracts to review. We've got 100 plus employees to sit down and meet with and talk about their situation. We've got just a whole lot of work to do in a short time, less than 100 days to get it done. So we're going to move on, and one of the most challenging tasks that we have is the information systems. I doubt there's anybody in this room that isn't touched by technology one way or the other at work. In a hospital, as you can well imagine, there's probably not a department that's not touched in one way or another by technology, by the information systems. So tonight, Brian Dorr, who's the czar of information systems for CHC. I just want to see you go for you. Brian's going to give a short presentation on what the task is for information systems. And I will tell you all that one of the big challenges, both for ETMC and for CHC in the district, is that we have just started this thing. There's been a little bit of preliminary work done, but until certain agreements as to who's going to do what, that really did not get finalized until this last week. So now we got our running shoes on and we're going. So some of the information that you will see over the coming days will change a little bit as CHC and the district become more aware of some of the information that ETMC shares with us. So it's going to be a lot of people doing a lot of work. You're going to see a lot of Barbara and myself roaming the halls and meeting with people both inside the hospital and outside the hospital. This is a great opportunity for the community of Crockett and the whole county, really, Houston County. So with that, I'll shut up and Brian.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where we are right now and what we have to do in the immediate future and then kind of where we need to kind of take it long term. Okay, so I just give you a sense of where we're going to go with this. If I can get my computer to update here, there we go. So the current situation is, as you probably are all aware, ETMC currently hosts all IT systems, right? Currently hosts all of our IT systems. And when we say host, we're not just talking about they manage them, they're here, they do that. They're all housed in their co-location, in their data centers in Thailand, okay? There's only one true server on site here, and it's just collecting data in the OB and transmitting that to their system. So it's very integrated with everything that they do at all of their hospitals. And there's really kind of four major areas that we are looking at. We're looking at clinical systems, so you see some of those here. We're talking about revenue cycle. That's billing and collecting for insurance companies and patients and things like that. Then we have general financials. Those are like accounting packages and payroll and supplies that we have to kind of take into account. And then we have kind of core infrastructure, IT, phones, networks, PCs. How do we connect all of those together? And we have to look at a transition plan that addresses all of those kind of key areas. And what you need to know, I think, is that ETMC's system is a fairly advanced and very integrated system. The HIS platform, all the accounting tools and things like that have been in place for a number of years. The electronic medical record system they put in place at the end of March of 2013 based on the information we've been provided. So we've got a few years of clinical data about how we take care of patients that's electronic as well. So we have to deal with that. And the other thing that we have to deal with is that there's a government program out there called Meaningful Use, where they get, you get incentive funding for meeting certain levels of implementation of technology and using that technology in everyday patient care. And there's 4 payments in 4 years that come with that program as long as you meet all of the increasingly aggressive criteria. And right now, we're in the 2nd year of stage 2, which means we're in the 4th year. And so we're expecting a payment, an incentive payment, the last one, coming in this fall or the beginning of next year, depending on the government's making some changes to that program right now, and they may extend it a few months. So we have to be cognizant of that as we're kind of moving through that. And the challenge there is that we don't just lose those incentive funds, but if we stop now, we have to be cautious that we might not only lose those funds, but we'll start receiving penalties from Medicare on every single patient claim that comes to the door. If we say now we've been doing this program, we've been on track, and now we're going to stop, we have concerns about that. We have to be very cautious about that. It's an escalating penalty. It's small at first, and it keeps growing. So, but with the razor-thin margins in healthcare that we all know and we have right now, every dollar is critical. So we have to be cognizant of that as we move forward. I want to give you just an idea of the scope of the current IT. So we talk about these 4 areas: clinicals, revenue cycle, financial, and technology. You probably, maybe you can read them back there, but when Bill talked about 100 days and 100 this and 100 that, there's probably 100 actual applications that we have to replace. It seems like it's fairly straightforward to replace clinicals, but you'll look on here and there's pharmacy databases and things you just wouldn't think of, right? We have rural health clinic that we have to implement a system for. We have OB and we have radiology and lab, and so we have all that stuff. And then we have to obviously bill and collect on the patients that come into our facility. So there's a ton of little systems that all do that. It sounds like a nice thing when you say it's Cerner or it's Sorian or it's MedSeries 4, but it's really a bunch of tools combined. The interesting thing about this, and the reason that this is up here, is that one of the things that is a challenge for the organization, you'll see on this slide, you'll see a lot of red with things crossed out. So based on the discussions that we had with ETMC back in the fall, these systems will not be provided by ETMC. Basically, when we sat down and talked with them and talked with their CIO, Paula, she said, look, there's a lot of configuration on financial systems to be able to continue to bill and collect. We have to reconfigure payroll systems. It's a very large task because you have all these shift diffs and different pay rates and things like that you have to build. And then benefits change. So the ETMC perspective was anything that touches patient care or billing and collecting for the hospital, we will provide you access to in the contract. Anything outside of that, you will take over as of day 1. So as of 6/1, all those items in red, we no longer have access to it, and so we'll talk about that, but that's the transition plan. So we've kind of developed a 3-phase transition because there's an immediate need that we have to develop systems to take over for all those redlined items on June 1st. Right shortly thereafter, starting that project, we have to start thinking about what are we going to do for the long term and for the hospital. How do we build that? Because you don't just implement those systems overnight. Those take time to build, develop, contract, and all of that. So talking about starting right now, getting started on what do we do for 5/31/61, and then we move into a transition phase, which is the interim period where we design, deploy, develop, train, test, and do all of that for that transition period. And then right now we're looking at potentially, beginning of the year timeframe to implement an Hchd Crockett system. And at that point, we would plan to transition all of everything that you've seen on the previous slides to the Hchd system and platform. So the first thing is, what do we have to do by May 31st, right? Because that's probably our biggest challenge facing us right now. So you can see some of the systems here. We talked a little bit about them: supplies, patient scheduling, payroll, time and attendance, basic things like telephones and badges, right? We have to replace all of that. And so we're looking right now and developing plans on every single one of those key components. I will tell you, some of them will move to new systems on May 31st. Some of them, honestly, there's not a lot of value in moving to a system to move to the future system right now. There's not time to build it in our future plan. We just can't roll it out. So some things like scheduling may go back to either a book or a manual process that's electronic and a shared schedule, but it may not be a scheduling system in the short term. We really have to do that to take, and kind of step back and say, we need to focus on what do we do for the future and how do we do that most effectively and most efficiently. So, and then, communications is obviously a big deal, especially for us IT guys, but email and calendaring is going to be another critical system that we have to implement an entire new system. And we're looking at a cloud-based system for that we use at a number of facilities. So we have some other considerations that we talked about as we kind of work through this. And the contract does call for ETMC to provide us with 12 months of IT support. So we really do have, if needed, until the end of next May to get these systems up and running. But honestly, we feel like we need to start immediately to make a smooth transition. We don't want to be running at the finish line to do that. The other thing that we're going to need, honestly, is external project management. As you can imagine, there are 100 tasks on our big project plan. About 20 of those are mine, but each one of those probably has hundreds and hundreds of tasks underneath it. So one of the things that we're requesting and looking at is, can we get an external project manager that is literally focused every day on the transition plan? How do we get from here to June 1st, and then how do we get from June 1st off of all systems? And in the contract, one of the discussions that we've had is, honestly, the contract calls for, because everything is very tightly integrated at ETMC, we don't receive any elimination of cost until all those systems are replaced. Because I really can't pull out billing first, and I really can't pull out the clinical component first, because all those charges in the ETMC system are integrated and flow from patient care right over into billing. So I really have an integrated system, and I can't really untie pieces of it. It just wouldn't be efficient, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So just so you are aware, that's one thing. So we're looking at that and saying, okay, how do we get to that end game as quickly as possible? And then through discussions with the board previously, there is a desire to move off of ETMC systems, not wait until next May to do that, but to move off as quickly as feasible. We want to be prudent, we want to be methodical in how we go about that, but at the same time, we want to get moving, and we need to do that quickly so that we can, this organization can function independently on its own. Okay. A couple other things. So we talked about the transition plan. What do we need to do to get there as quickly as possible? What are the things that we need to do and get moving on? But down the road, we really need to start thinking about where are we going and where are we taking this. We work with a lot of small community hospitals. Not all small, I have a 600-bed hospital as well, but we work with a lot of critical access hospitals. And so we know a lot of those vendors. And what we did is look at the plethora of vendors out there and say, which ones do we think fit best with the model that we've got here? Both with the inpatient model, with the outpatient. capacity components, lab, radiology, PT, ED, and a little clinic. So we've looked at a lot of those systems. And there's two that we really look at. When we look at those, we really felt like they fit this model and that we know very well. And that's a product called MedHost, and there's a product called CPSI. We had it, each one of those in probably half a dozen hospitals, almost half a dozen. So we're very familiar with those. We've talked with both of those. We've gotten proposals to look and say, what is it going to take? Because we want to walk in and say, look, can they meet that end of the year timeline? They've got a lot of work on their plate, so when can they get started? And what's that cost look like? Because as we start to plan and as we start to talk about the financial situation of the facility, we need to understand what those requirements are. And I wish I could say technology was inexpensive and you could buy it off the shelf. But unfortunately, the case is that it's getting more expensive because there's more and more components that we're making electronic, and we're trying to automate as much as we can. At the current time, these prices are not negotiated at this point, but they're kind of list price, and we'll get them down somewhat. But just to give you a sense, the capital expenditure that we're looking at is probably in the $2.5 to $3 million range for a complete HIS financial system, everything we've seen out there. And that's capital needs. And then the ongoing operating expense, because you have to maintain all of those systems. Those are things that right now ETMC does, but all the PCs, all the networks, all the email, and all of the HIS and EMR systems and clinical systems have to be maintained. So you're looking at probably in the $750,000 to $1 million a year range to manage and maintain all of those systems. So that's what we've been looking at. You know, we'll talk a little bit more as we get into it about what we think the recommendation should be for this and where we need to go next. So from that perspective, you know, what we need immediately is an understanding and approval from the board to say they need to get moving. We have to get that transition underway. We estimate about $465,000 of costs that we need right now from a systems perspective to get things moving. And we can give you a breakdown if you'd like. And that would include that project management time that would start now and go all the way through the final build. That's really the transition cost. How do we get started on doing that? Then we need to talk about some financial considerations. You know, I showed you $2.5 to $3 million and $1 million. Some of that can be juggled. Depending on the board's appetite for capital versus operating expense, we can shift some of that. Some of the vendors will let us not spend as much capital up front, but my operating expenses will be higher. So they'll let me balance that if I need to. So we need to have some discussion about what do we think we have the appetite for and how can we best proceed with that. Then we need to talk about, do we need demos of those systems? If we do, we need to get on that today, tomorrow. We need to identify, honestly, the key stakeholders that we need to talk to within the organization from each department, and we need to get them scheduled to come in and give you demos of both systems so that we can have that discussion. I can also provide, recommendations and talk to folks, let people talk to people who have these systems implemented if you'd like, and we can decide from that perspective. It really just depends on how the board feels we should proceed. From our perspective, in order to meet an end-of-the-year timeframe, we really need to have a decision not only on the core, but on the entire spectrum of everything we're talking about for future state by May. Because these systems take about 6 months to implement. And we want to give ourselves a little leeway, just in case. But once we have that decision, then we'll enter into contracting, final contracting with the vendors. And there'll be dozens of contracts that we'll need to evaluate and go through for all of those different various components, because we'll have one core and then we'll have a bunch of things that kind of bolt onto that to make it a complete system for this. It's a pretty monumental task. And then as I get at the last piece, and it's long-term and it's big, but it is the last component, is really then we get into the development phase. And we work with people within the organization. We have a lot of expertise. With people that have actually built these systems before, both of these systems. So we'll bring that to bear, and we'll use some of their experience to help us build this, but we'll really start building a system that is specific to Crockett and does what Crockett needs to do. It won't be us forklifting a system from somewhere else and dropping it on Crockett. That's why it takes a little bit of extra time, but at the end of the day, it's Crockett's in your system. It's what we designed for this facility. And then we'll look at, obviously, testing, training, and then the ultimate day is implementation. And a lot of that is going to be coordinated with ETMC, because we can't just turn up our system, because we're riding on their networks, we're riding on their internet, we're riding on everything, so we do that. So all of that, as we get into that and into those next steps, has to be coordinated with ETMC. We've already started to have some initial discussions with them on that. They're excited to work with us. We said they've been agreeable to meet with us as soon as possible to get going. I think they understand, honestly, in talking with their IT leadership about the monumental task that we're undertaking in the time frame we're doing it. It's big. It's challenging, but I can tell you we've done it a number of times before. We're doing it right now in a couple other locations, so it's something that we have a lot of experience with. We just know time is of the essence, and we need to get moving. So with that, if there's any questions, does the board have any questions on that information?
You're saying the decision needs to be made by May?
By May. Yes. And based on that, it depends on how detailed we want to get and how much involvement from whom to evaluate that decision. We have the details of proposals already, and we can share that, but it just depends on if we want to see and touch and feel things before we jump into that.
And realistically, then, it's after the decision is made, you're saying a 6-month window there for
Yes. For
implementation?
implementation, yes, of all the future state systems. Yes. Well, and again, as we have the opportunity to, we'll trim that as much as we possibly can. We understand the desire to be our own entity and be individual and state alone. So we'll get there as quickly as we can. If we can trim a month off that, we will. But we don't want to do it at the expense of having the best system possible for the patients here.
So then you're saying by the end of that 6-month period, hopefully we would be freestanding and
Correct.
separated from ETMC?
Correct. Yes, and what we're looking at, there's a couple different options. A lot of times, in some other instances, we would kind of piecemeal things in while we're running ETMC system, and we would start. And we may do some of that. Obviously, email and things like that they'll already be in place. But on that implementation day, it will be what we consider a big bang. Everything goes in at once. We've trained everybody. Everybody has procedures and workflow already mapped and designed. And so when we do that, we turn it on, and then a day later, we turn everything else off once we validate that everything's working as anticipated. So it's a lot of fun. The's going to be a ton of folks here helping me out, making sure that everything's working all across. And, it's an exciting day. It's challenging. I'm excited. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Ryan, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you all.
That concludes our public section. It's 6 o'clock, and we will adjourn for an executive session, meeting our times, and we will reconvene in public, but I don't believe there's going to be any action taken